Facebook Live.
on Facebook.
I'll read right off that thing. And then we post it on YouTube too. We have a YouTube, but it's not live. Well, good evening, and once again, it's Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, so that means it's VB LiberTEA Podcast. That's correct. Wednesday night from 7 to 8 p.m., you can view the VB LiberTEA Podcast on your Facebook Live page. Your comments are encouraged. You can put your comments or your questions in the comment section, and about halfway through the show, we'll turn to those questions. And tonight, we may go a little longer. I'll talk a little bit about our surprise guest and topical guest at that. I'm John Moss, your host. We are sponsored by the Tidewater Liberty Partners and the Virginia Beach Tea Party, and we broadcast with the special support of State Senator Bill DeStep. And voting started September 20th, I believe it was, early voting. And if you live in the right district, you can put a little check mark or color in there for Senator Bill DeStep if you live in that district. And our producer tonight, as always, and he's back with us now, as Robert K. Dean. So before I get to the Honorable Barbara Henley of District 2 of the City Council of Virginia Beach, I'm going to make a few announcements, and then I'll do a little preface for my longtime friend, Barbara, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But this, on November the 9th, that'll be after Election Day, which is November the 7th, I believe it is, at 2849 Princess Anne Road at the Masonic Lodge there. The Virginia Beach Tea Party will be hosting our city auditor, Linda Romeus. Maybe he'll be talking about that latest study about entertainment and what does and doesn't make money. I just got an electronic copy of that today, and I'm interested to digest to look at just how comprehensive it really was. And then this coming Saturday, we will be there at the Mom's Kitchen. Is that correct, Robert?
Yes.
There's going to be a breakfast from the Tidewater Liberty Partners, and they are inviting the various candidates running for statewide office because it's kind of like we're at the final, getting close to the final countdown on that. So come out to that breakfast. Program starts at 9, but breakfast is served as early as 8. So get an early start, and that'll be a great program. Next Wednesday, that's Wednesday, October 27th, 7 to 8 p.m. right here, same station, same time. We're going to have the Department of Human Services is going to be here with their team members talking about all the things we do for food assistance for people that are suffering from insufficient income given the inflation in prices, and providing food from various different programs throughout the city. And I think people will be very enlightened just how much volunteer effort, and I know Mrs. Henley's aware of that goes on. That's very unique and is not really matched at any other community in the Tidewater area. Well, now we're getting to, many of you know there was a very topical issue on the council agenda last night. Well over tens of people showed up over hours of speaking relative to the silos at Southern Pines. And silos is certainly a good description of what's being built on that high-density property that encroaches on the Green Line. Mrs. Henley is going to talk about that. She's going to talk about the consequences. I first served with Barbara in 1986 to 1990, and then again from 1992 to 95, and then again from 2011 to 2022. So while we haven't always been on the same boat on these land use issues, we pretty much have always been in sync, trying to maintain the quality and the integrity of the process and not putting zoning up for sale. And I think that's exactly what we had the other night. But with that, Barbara, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of put it in perspective. And what's the consequences? Because now that decision's been made. There's no going back. So, Barbara, what's the future look like?
Bleak. I'm really concerned because not only is the project not a project that is going to be desirable, I think, but the policies that were changed to adopt that are now going to be in place. And what it's going to lead to, I'm very concerned in District 2, my district, because, of course, we've had the Green Line since 1979, which has been a great guide for us in the property as it was in the South. But this property being below Princess Anne Road is in the green line or below the green line, and it just goes so far above what the green line anticipated that it's got to set a precedent. And because we know in land use issues, of course, we've got all those constitutional requirements that we treat everybody the same. And even though maybe the city council might decide they're going to vote against a development for some reason in there, if it goes to the court is going to say, is this in compliance with the way you've been treating other people? And once we treat one property owner in one fashion, that's what is expected to be applied to others. And we deviated so much in the policies that were stretched and actually changed to allow this, it's got to have future implications.
I want to note to the listeners who might not have watched that hours and hours last night, it went late into the night, but the eloquence of the speakers and the research and the detail, all the comments were so substantive that any person that wasn't probably at the end of a Franklin Johnston group campaign contribution probably would never have voted for it. But also how it came to be from the Planning Commission just the Wednesday before. You know, this council under the mayor trying to shut down any one single council member ever been able to make a voice on the dais. They adopted a rule back in January that it takes 3 people to sponsor an item before it can be on the agenda. Then they adopted a rule that it takes 3 people to get something on the legislative package that's a non-agenda item, a non-charter change item, and it takes 3/4 of the council, 8 votes, to get something on the agenda just for the public hearing if it involves a charter change. But they reserved that one person, this is Mayor Dyer, who got a substantial series of contributions from the Franklin Johnson Group, to be able to expedite an item. So in 5 days, it's on council for a vote. But yet that didn't even require the district members' concurrence. And I'd like to know, did the mayor reach out to you and tell you that he was expediting this item, or was that just a surprise?
It was a surprise. I found out when I went down to get the planning items for my forum, and was told that it had been expedited, and I wasn't very pleased at that because it's a very, very, very complicated issue, and to get all of the information out to the public in such a short period of time just seemed impossible.
So the city manager nor the planning director didn't tell you that something in your district was being expedited?
No. I went down and in a briefing that I have to get prepared for my district forums, that's when I found out that it was expedited.
Well, you don't have to say this, but for the listeners listening, I think you don't have to be an intel officer in the CIA to read the tea leaves as to what was going on here. And it wasn't civic engagement, which is the mantra of our mayor. And it certainly wasn't designed for transparency. And it was, I think, it's my words, you don't have to say a single word, but disrespectful of the district council member. I can't imagine that any of our state legislators and you've been too kind in your response, but that's the kind of person you are. And I admire you for being a lot nicer person than myself. But so when we talk about these consequences, so that there's another project, I'm not asking you to talk about the details, but when you talked about the precedent setting, we have another project out there, Project Wayne, which is even a more intrusive movement onto the green line than this project.
And that's what I think, that has sort of been silent for a while because of its differences. But when this one went through with such a resounding yes vote last night, I think it's setting the message that, below the green line, we're open for business, just bring us a deal. And it's troubling.
In the course, and I watched some of it, but not all of it. I'll be honest, I got off and did other things and came back. And when I finally came back, it was over. That thing had moved on. But as part of the background, did they share with you how many apartments we actually have that have occupancy permits, the number of apartments that are in the pipeline but are not yet constructed but have been permitted, and which are under construction. So we got an idea, if you didn't do this project in 2 years, that's usually how long it takes to develop, how many apartments we're going to have relative to the demographic demand for apartments.
Well, see, with just such a short period of time, there wasn't opportunity to really get that type of information. I had actually, because of having to react within 6 days and knowing that my constituents in that area were very much concerned, but a lot of folks that don't follow it, just didn't have the background. So I took the step of, at my expense, renting the Masonic Lodge on Princess Anne Road the Monday before the Planning Commission. I guess that was the 9th. And from 3 to 7, I just took all of my material, the ordinances and everything down there, and just told people to come look at it and make your own mind up, but to give people an opportunity to become informed. And I had a lot of people. And I think that was so good because it showed that people were concerned, but there are several items in that area that's kind of hanging out there, and people are concerned about what's going to happen to them.
The reason why I mentioned that, because I did look, and it wasn't that the planning staff is recommending something, and then you have the mayor and the vice mayor making national security claims about this contributes, and absent this, we have national security issues. Well, what is it you're saying? If you're saying that, making that claim, which anyone has to watch the show, and then you can't even tell people, is it the lack of inventory that's the issue, or it's the cost of the inventory relative to the housing allowance that people receive? Because housing allowance, making it affordable by the hour, is a Department of Defense responsibility. So if you don't know how many apartments there are, if you don't know what the average vacancy rate, which is 7.13% in Virginia Beach, I looked it up on the Google tonight, and you don't know how many apartments, and I believe there's like 1,000 apartments coming online in just the resort area alone.
Pipeline now.
Yep, pipeline. Then you are talking out of your shoe, to be polite. And if you don't know, and if you're saying, oh, well, this is families, are we talking about senior chiefs? Are we talking about first class, getting $1,800 a month housing allowance, tax-free? Well, if that's not sufficient, then we should be talking to who? Senator Jen Keegans, and we should be talking to Senator Warner and Senator Kane, because the Department of Defense has the ability to make adjustments, and they just adjusted them from 23 over 22 by 12.8%. So this isn't a zoning issue. This isn't a housing issue because we're ignorant of what it is, but it's a ability to pay for the inventory that's available. That doesn't become a national security issue for the city of Virginia Beach. It's a personnel and family support issue for the Department of Defense. That's a national issue. But I'm certain what it is. It's a good cover for a campaign contribution enabler of broaching the green line and setting a precedent, which I think is what they wanted, and then somehow make it distraction like a magic trick. Don't look at what the real truth is. Look over here. I'm really making sure our base stays open. I mean, give me a break.
Well, the background of this is kind of interesting too when you talk about the staff involvement and so forth, and this troubles me a lot. This actually had first been to the Planning Commission in August, and it went through with staff approval, and the Planning Commission actually voted 10-1 to approve it. And when I got the background on it, again, preparing for my forum, and I looked at it and said, how in the world did the Navy ever approve this? Well, the Navy had not seen it, even though one of the first things that the BRAC agreement said was that going forward, anytime there was going to be a change in a zoning issue or planning issue, the Navy would be brought in early. No such meeting occurred. But looking at this property, it straddles the interfacility traffic area, the ITA line, which was an important part of the BRAC agreement because the ACU's footprint was adopted with the BRAC in 2005, and the area of this flyway between Oceana and Fentress was an extremely important issue with the Navy at that time, because those of us were around remember those times, all of those things, the people complaining about the noise and the encroachment, and this is how we wound up on that BRAC list for closure. So with those requirements, one of the things that we were required to do was to establish this area from Princess Anne Road south, because Princess Anne Road there is the green line.
Right.
And so that area of the high noise zone from Oceana to Fentress, from Princess Anne Road to the city line, was designated the ITA. And we had to agree that we would not allow any residential in that area above what was already allowed by right zoning, which was agricultural, which was one house per 15 acres. And so that was just one of the agreements we made with the BRAC. But this property straddles that line. And so about half of it was in the ITA and half on the other side. But that first plan that went all the way through to the Planning Commission had apartment units in the ITA, which it couldn't be there because of our agreement. So everything was stopped, and it was on our agenda to be approved September 5th, but they withdrew it.
Can I inject here? So I just want for the listeners. So we had so if anyone, talk about the professional staff now, if the professional staff, because these policies and agreement are in place, they're not a secret, they're part of the lot. So now we had a staff who either out of ignorance, including the department head who's supposed to do oversight of all this, including who are accountable only to the city manager. So they did not apply the rules that existed. So they approved it I'm assuming out of ignorance. I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt. And so then it goes to the Planning Commission. So now you have the lawyers looking at this as well, because these things are for legal purposes. So now the city attorney's staff, not Mr. Dial, they've now not said, wait a minute, this doesn't conform with our policies, but I'm sure there's a statement that says it does, right? So I'm just going, so then it gets to the Planning Commission. That's when you first get a chance, and whoops, so now they have to do a restart. So my question is, independent of what has happened, it's a bad decision, someone should be doing a root cause analysis as to, because I'm sure all these people are going to get, in this ball performance pay and bonuses and how great a job they do, but on something very important, they were negligent, grossly negligent, I would say. But where's the root cause analysis, how that ever happened to start with? And why did it happen? Who's accountable? And I realize the city manager can't tell the council what action he took, but even he isn't escaping, because that means he's not exercising appropriate accountability that people feel that can happen. And no one's talking about a true error of judgment on a huge scale, because this isn't like some nuanced thing. This is big all the time. How did that happen? Who is being held accountable? And I think that's what frustrates our listeners, is if they made that kind of mistake where they work, they probably would be at the Virginia Employment Commission. Because now, and who gets cheated? You got cheated because you can't effectively represent. And who pays the price? The people of your district.
My people definitely are going to pay the price. But because of that, I became really aware of this whole issue of what about these properties that straddle the line. And so for the 3 Tuesdays in September, each Tuesday, I made a statement to the council in our informal session about these issues that we really needed to look at, because we needed a policy. If these properties are straddling the line, how are they going to be treated? And each week I told them, not necessarily with this development, but just in general, it was a policy that we need to determine what we were going to do with. Well, then, of course, I thought when it was drawn September 5th, that, okay, they're going to go back and totally redesign. Within 24 hours, we had the notification that the new plan would be shown to the ITA committee that Thursday, 2 days later. So overnight, that plan was changed to take all of the apartments out of the ITA and just put them all into the 3.5, 3+ acres that is not in the ITA. And I don't think any engineer is good enough to have totally re-engineered that plan overnight, but that's what happened. And so now what we had before us is what then in September, which is a pretty fast track, because I think if you're going to get anything on the October Planning Commission, you have to have it in by the first of the month. Well, somehow or other, this landed back on the next Planning Commission agenda in October, and then went immediately to the council. So
That just proves that if you have the right connections, the rules don't apply.
well, it so much happened so quickly with all of this turning, which is also very important. So 2 weeks ago, I introduced with the signature or approval or accompaniment of 4 people, a resolution to the council saying we need to study this issue of properties that straddle the ACUS lines. How are we going to treat density? How are we going to treat notification? How are we going to treat sound attenuation? And even our workforce housing ordinance says that no workforce housing can go in an area that's impacted by APZ, an accident potential zone, or a noise zone. And for these properties that straddle the line, how do we treat it? Well, the city attorney's opinion was that since our ordinance does not prohibit us allowing them the density that they would have, even though it was not developable for residential, since we don't prohibit it, it's allowed.
And that's probably the right, though unfortunate, the right ruling in given the rules of how the Commonwealth works. So I'm sure it's disappointing for all of us, but I understand, the law is the law. But the process is the process, and they didn't follow it.
But we didn't even allow an opportunity to examine that to see if we needed to change it. But I have gone back to 2005 and reread the joint land use study and the ordinances that were passed during the BRAC time. And one of the ordinances particularly says, we know that all of this is very complicated and there are going to be issues that we have not addressed. And as they come along and you see that there are things that need to be addressed, in that ordinance it actually directed the city manager and the city attorney to bring amendments to the council as they were recognized. Well, this is clearly an issue that was not anticipated, and we need to have something done to determine what our policy is going to be. If it doesn't prohibit it now, should we be prohibiting it? But see, what we did with this policy, with this application last night, we actually rezoned property in the ITA for apartments. And now they can't be built there, but the density for what would have been able to be built there is going to be built on the other side of the same 6 acres.
Well, I want to touch on another point that people, imagine that you contract with someone to build you a house. And they build a house, and along the way they said, well, I know this was the price I could have charged you, but I'm taking $25,000 off the price because I know interest rates have gone up. I'm trying to mitigate that. So then you say, oh, great. So then you come back and you come back to him and say 2 years later and say, I'd like you to build me a detached garage. And he says, well, this is the price, but I'm adding on to that price that $25,000 I didn't charge you before. And you're looking at saying, wait a minute, what does the past have to do with the future? Well, I know, Mrs. Henley, this is a good point to tell you about if you want to think about the precedent that we've set. In August of 2014, I think it was, we approved and the applicant got approval, and as a condition and as part of the, I'll call it debate to approve it, didn't request all the by right density he could get. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell the rest of the story.
Well, that was back in 2014, and the same applicant applied for an A18 apartment.
That's
dwelling.
18 apartments to the acre.
18 apartments to the acre. And he this was a conditional zoning, which means he made certain proffers or offers that we would look at, and the first one would always be, it's got to be built according to this plan. And any changes in it would have to come back to council. So it's one of our conditional zonings. And, you know, we were kind of looking at that time at whether or not we needed to have more opportunities for people living around the municipal center. And that particular site was between commercial, which is where the Harris Teeter is built, between that shopping center and the golf course, and kind of a out-of-the-way place. And with all of the conditions and so forth, I was dumb enough to say, okay, it looks like...
I think the word is trusting enough.
Trusting enough to say, okay, this does look good. And so I even made the motion to approve it. But now, this applicant, 9 years later, because this new parcel that he has purchased is adjoining that first parcel by 11.5 feet, it's considered contiguous. So he says, well, this is phase 2 of that property, which was phase 1. And I had proffered that that was over 15 acres, so it was considerably more acreage. He said, if I had built that with all the 18 acres, 18 lots per acre that I could have built 282, but I proffered and built only 240. So that means I've got 42 units that I didn't build there, and I want to take those and put on top of these that I'm building now. Well, he was gracious enough to only take 31 of them, so we've still got 11 somewhere out there. But we don't do this.
That is a precedent setting. I don't ever recall
this is a precedent setting to me. And I have been asking the staff, tell me another one where we did this, and I've gotten answers of where we have maybe made some other changes in a development, which we can do. Any proffers that have to be changed come back to council. But to be able to take units that were not used and maybe have been land banked or something all this time and move them to another property, we don't do that.
But there wasn't a vote to change that conditional use zoning to create the 42 unit capacity. They just allowed an increase over the base. They didn't have a vote to change that parcel.
Actually, this vote last night was changing the proffers in that original.
Oh, it did? Okay, I didn't understand that
things.
watching it. I guess I didn't watch it close enough.
I think the wording in there, that was the intent anyway. But so that's a new precedent. And so I guess we look at all of these conditional zonings that have been done in all of the other districts in the city, not just District 2 now. This is a precedent. This is a policy change. And if a developer has built fewer units than he could have built, he can now come back and say, particularly if he manages to get another piece of property that somehow touches it, I want my units now moved to this other piece of property.
Folks on Shore Drive, watch out. But, my conclusion, and I'd be interested in listeners' comments, what this tells us is we cannot trust our city staff to look out for our best interest, to give us timely, transparent information, to act in a responsible manner, to engage, I'll use the mayor's mantra, civic engagement, to represent our equities. And we are at the victims of, I won't call it deception, but purposeful non-communication, not following the rules, or we wouldn't be on that timeline of 10-1. And then no one talks about accountability. No one talks about the second and third order effects. It's rezoning for funding, campaign funding is what it appears to me. And that's a sad state of affairs that people now have to think, who is the next victim in these districts? So I would say the district council members who all signed up for this, like you said, the precedent.
I didn't sign up for
I know you didn't.
I got it.
And I want to say
sign up for it.
that Councilmember Taylor from also voted no. And anyone who watches that and do watch it, it certainly was and I'm going to say this, and I know you would never, but and all my time being in Virginia Beach when I wasn't on council, this has got to be about the worst city council we have ever had, and we've had some bad ones. And but the decisions these people are making, and just total disregard of all citizen input in the facts, is really, really sad. And this damage cannot be undone.
That's
That
the
is
bad
what
thing.
is so horrible, and how much more damage they can do.
Well, there's more.
Okay, we're
Right,
listening.
because, okay, now that these two properties are joined together by 11 and a half feet, and one's phase two of the first one, he can't get enough parking on this new site to accommodate these 176 new apartment units. So I think it's 40 of the parking spaces that he's going to be required are in that other piece of property, which is pretty far away for anybody to have to walk and carry their groceries back to this 4-story apartment complex. So
My son lived on the 4th floor of a walk-up, and I can tell you that's a huff. And when he moved out and had to move back to the same place, he got a second floor apartment.
Well, so in order to even think about saying it's got enough parking, they had to use the acreage from the previous unit to calculate it. Then, when you look at this new site, there's almost no open space. I think the number was that of that 6.2 acres of this total, 5.1 acre is impervious. But the only pervious surfaces are just a little bit in between these apartment buildings and some around the islands of the parking garage.
Well, those national security families are so desperate need of this thing. They're not looking for places to have open space, green space for their children. They just want a place to park their car. I mean, didn't you realize that?
There is no place for a kid to get outside on this property. And when I asked the Parks Department, what's the closest park? The only thing they could tell me was on the other side of the 4-lane Princess Anne Road in Christopher Farms, there is a little neighborhood park. But anything else that is going to be built today is going to have, I think, as I looked at it, A18 would require could only have 50% lot coverage. Well, to meet the lot coverage, again, they've got to go over to that other parcel and use that calculation to be able to come up with this.
Well, it is insane. But, like before, I've always said, I don't blame the private sector people who their whole concern is maximizing profit, and that's what they're after. So they're like kids. They're not responsible for the consequences. They're just asking for stuff. But the adults in the room are supposed to be the 11 members of city council who are supposed to act in the larger public interest and say, yeah, I know this is what you would want, and I understand why you want it, but no matter how many sprinkles you put on this thing, the workforce housing, just trying to don't look at anything else. You don't need to know their name. It's the Jedi mind trick. And, but it doesn't, but they should say no. I don't blame them for asking. I look at our staff and say, I know you're in the High Density Urban Land Social Engineering Institute graduates, but there ought to be some intellectual curiosity here. And so why are you recommending it? And then why don't you know your process? But more importantly, why are we saying yes? That's not that there couldn't be a project that we would say yes to, but when you look at all the things, it adds up to, that what's that thing from Forrest Gump? Stupid is as stupid does. And that's what you say about this project.
Well, the thing is,
council's decision about the project, I should say, because I don't want to comment. They're asking, they're entitled to ask. We're not entitled to say yes.
Well, there had to be so much manipulation of the numbers, because in one thing they would count all of the property, in another thing they would only count one, like workforce housing. Okay, and this applicant has not applied for our program unless he applied today, but it allows, I believe, and I'm not as up on that as I should be, the numbers. I think you have to have 17% of your property has to have workforce housing in order to get the bonus.
And that would now apply to both parcel 1 and parcel 2?
They said that they were only looking at this parcel for part of it, but I think to get that eligibility, they had to account for both of them. But he has to allow 30% of his units, his density, he gets the density bonus of, I think, 30-some lots, or maybe it's, no, 30-some lots, I guess. 30 units.
Okay.
So that's another density bonus that he got. But see, I kept saying, how in the world can we get 176 units on this site? Well, here's the way they did it. All right, it was 6.26 acres. If that's zoned A18 and you could build all of it, I think it comes to something like 112 units. Well, of course, he couldn't build all of it because the part that's in the ITA is unbuildable for residential, but they're allowing him to get credit for it anyway. So by doubling up...
But the law permits that.
Well, because it doesn't prohibit it.
Correct. I just want to make sure that he's not getting something he isn't really entitled to. I just want to make sure that's clear. I always like to be fair. But
I've said we need to study that and decide that we're not going to do it, but we aren't allowed to do that either. So that's one way he gets all of that density. But then on top of that, he's adding the 31 lots that he's transferring from, quote,
the units,
phase 1, plus his density bonus that he's getting because he's going to allow workforce housing.
Now, is the workforce housing density bonus predicated on the 112 plus the 31, or just on the 112? I'm trying to figure out.
I'm not sure
what the base is that you multiply against.
But it's all of those manipulations of the numbers, because okay, this property is zoned A18, which is 18 units per acre, and so I look at that as this property, as it's built out, should be built 18 units per acre. Well, if this were built 18 units per acre, you're the math guy, what's that, 54 units on 3 acres? Well, let's say it's 3.5 acres, so let's say 60 units. He could get if it were being developed as A18. But he's getting 176 units on here because of all of these manipulations.
Well, the best way I could explain it to my wife when she's saying, what are you getting so hyped up about? I said, well, come outside. So we walked out our front door. I says, because I live in a 1 acre lot. I said, face our house. I said, I won't say their name. The people live over here. That's an acre. The people live over here is an acre. And we're an acre. On these 3 lots, you'd have 176 families. And she said, oh, I won't say exactly what she said, but oh my goodness. And, but that's how you have to really see it, because now it's a physical space and you're saying, oh my goodness, that's 176 cars at least. And that is all this. And you're saying, oh, that's, and that's just one thing to visualize that, but not saying that's inherently means it's not right or what that location. But to your point is, the council, 9 people made a decision with a lot of issues not adjudicated and a lot of concerns not addressed or mitigated. And we're setting some precedents that we can now have to live with, and no respect to the community or deference to giving them more time to think about this. When we look at other issues, look at all the other things that we have, engagements and talk about and all this stuff that are less consequential than this. And but then the council said, yeah, I don't blame people for asking. Gosh knows we have some people ask, but I do blame the council for not doing their homework. And I blame the process by which the staff executed poorly and didn't even comply with our agreements, and we had to go back and redo this. All these things would say, danger, danger, Will Robinson, to buy from a TV show. Something doesn't smell right about this whole decision-making process.
Well, when you add that to our comprehensive plan, the Princess Anne Corridor study plan, the ITA plan, all say, this area, Princess Anne Road south to Chesapeake is open. I mean, and that was one of the things in the BRAC study, the joint land use study that was done in 2005, they said this area, because it's below the green line, is supposed to stay open. And so that's why, as one of the BRAC things that we had to do, we had to acquire $15 million worth of property every year in the accident potential zone and in the interfacility traffic area, so it would stay free of structures and would not be an impediment. Now, technically, by taking these properties, units, and sliding them across the line, it's technically in compliance with the ordinance. But when you're building these 4-story apartments literally inches from that line, and you say it's not going to be bothered by that noise, I don't think that's realistic.
Well, I think that's true, but to be, I try to be objective. So I am not. That doesn't mean I'm free from exercising my thoughts about judgment. But if in fact they are on that side of the line, and that's the legal line, then they were entitled to what? What you mentioned, the A18. So no one's debating any of that.
Yeah.
And even with the concerns you mentioned are legit, but you'd have to say the law is the law and the line is like the tax bracket. You're on this side or that side, and it doesn't make any difference. If you're $1 over, that next dollar gets taxed at a higher percent. So no one's arguing, I don't think you are either, about that the A18 couldn't work. What we're talking about is this unprecedented transfer from a prior decision. That's the garage. I'm going to now charge you for something I didn't charge you for before in a different project. What? We've never done that. And now this workforce housing piece and looking at all that that's really the incremental decision making that we're making that has consequences that we're just, the staff without any intellectual curiosity is passing the future a bad precedent. And I think in some cases, maybe it's more purposeful and they understand the second and third order effects. And this is just the ripple before the tidal wave, because obviously people want to build and the green line is getting in their way.
Well,
and that's my observation. And I've heard that from people in your district. They're concerned about stuff that they thought wasn't going to happen. And now they say, oh, we're going to make this place look like other parts of the city, when that wasn't the idea. I thought that, that's what I hear. And I mean, Elaine, you might be hearing something different from people, Sandbridge and whatnot, about their concerns about what they think this sets a precedent for.
Well, when I first saw this, the first reaction I had and question I had to the staff was, well, is he going to subdivide his property at the line and leave the part that's in the ITA zoned agricultural and let us look at A18 for this 3 acres that's not? That's a different thing if we're looking at it as A18. But that's not what he's doing. And that 18 units per acre is going to be built at something over 50 units per acre.
More importantly, it's what I want to make sure it's important. The Franklin Johnston Group is only asking. The people that are doing it are the 10 members of city council. Never blame the person that asked. A spoiled child is made by consenting parents. So don't blame the asker, blame the approver, because they're the people that are accountable to the public. Franklin Johnston has no accountability to me, to anyone, just to their stockholders, their equity owners, whatever. And that's okay. That's how our system works. But the government is accountable to us, and they should be looking after us, and their process shouldn't be expedited and accelerated for the benefit of an asker at the expense of the people that they serve at their consent. This is a huge, for people who always talk about process, and gosh, no, Bobby, the Mayor Dyer talks about process ad nauseum. This is nauseated process, not ad nauseum, but nauseated process. And that's what I think makes people angry.
Well, I look too at these people who are going to be living there, and they're going to be paying some pretty hefty rents, just because 50 of them are workforce housing. I think they're still about $1,300 a month for a one-bedroom apartment.
That's about the average price today, looking at the latest stuff
Well,
I saw in the market for a one
yeah.
bedroom. That's average. That's some high on Shore Drive. That's stuff North Military Highway, bring it down. It's,
But I look at how are these people, I mean, is this going to be a good place to live at that density? I mean, there's no open space for a kid to play. I look at it as being I said my question to the fire department was, with these really crowded parking lanes there and all of these 4-story apartments here, and you get that call at 3 o'clock in the morning that something's burning and all these cars are parked here, are you sure you're going to be able to get your ladder trucks in here and all the equipment you're going to have to fight that fire? I mean, we have to look at what it's going to be like for these people to live here.
well,
I look
just
at
so you
how
know, Barbara,
far-
there are some very good today off-the-shelf simulation software, and they can visually demonstrate to you whether or not the turning radiuses and all that are possible. So you should ask them to visually show you the show me state.
Well, that's what I've said. I want to see it all along the line. But I look at just how far these parking spaces are from these units, and how a poor mother is going to have to haul her groceries and carry her kids from this parking spot over here to her unit over here. I mean, the parking is not even convenient. Plus, it's not enough. We look at all of our deficiencies just in this project, and we haven't even talked about stormwater. So that this is just not designed well, and I worry about the people who are going to be paying some hefty rents to live here. And is that really the way we want it?
Do we have some questions, Robert?
No, but I had an observation, Barbara. What about the people who come to visit the apartment dwellers, number one? And the NIMBY issue always comes up, not in my backyard, but I noticed last night, and Elaine could maybe comment on this, there were new faces that I had never seen before. Major organizations that came out last night brought up very cogent questions, intelligent questions. How did this come about and everything else? And if Elaine you were right in the midst of all of this. These people were outraged. I sat at the television set screaming and yelling at when I heard some of Rosemary Wilson's comments about national security and Bobby Dyer's the doom and gloom and hell and fire and brimstone. And I never heard such outrageous comments in my life. And I heard the audience as much as I could, where there was groaning and that in the audience. Could you elaborate just for a moment on some of this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree with both of you. The people that came out were remarkable. I had chill bumps because this is public engagement at its finest. There were people representing organizations from all over the district, president of Farm Bureau, someone from the Agricultural Commission, different civic leagues, and each one of them was respectful, well-educated, and had very, very significant points to make about it. And each one of them had some different points. It was a great learning lesson. If only council had been listening, it would have been a great learning lesson for them. And none of them ever said, I'm against affordable housing or I'm against workforce development housing. Their concern was all the issues that Mrs. Henley has been bringing up, the Green Line, the ITA, and even more, the density levels, the precedents it's setting, everything that you've been discussing, that's what people are concerned about. No one was there to say, oh, we don't want this in our backyard and we don't want workforce
Plus,
housing.
this project isn't adjacent to any neighborhoods and isn't in anybody's backyard.
And there was, it was interesting to me that no one spoke about the numbers. There was a woman sitting next to me, and if you go back and look at it, she spoke towards the end. Her name was Sandra De Los Rios, and she had crunched the numbers on what the rents would be, and she gave council a list of the number of people who still would not be able to afford to live there. A teacher could not live there until she had taught for 10 years. She just went down the list. No one was listening. Truly, no one was listening. And when it came time for council and the developer to have the rebuttal, there were no answers. It was, oh, y'all just don't, I know y'all don't want workforce housing in your neighborhood, but we're going to do it anyway. That's not what those eloquent, passionate citizens were speaking about. And I've been to a lot of meetings. I have never seen this large of a crowd that Mrs. Henley was able to get engaged in this process.
And it was people across the city, not just people from District 2. That's what was really impressive. It wasn't the people most impacted in I would call it ground zero. It was people all over who could see we could be the next victim of this I'll call it pro-developer, don't give a hoot, be polite about citizen input. We just got to put up with it, but we know what we're doing, and we knew when we expedited it, it was done.
And I hope it came across on TV, because if you weren't there to see it, it was bone chilling, because I have, as many meetings as I have been at, I have never seen such a lack of disrespect for what the citizens were saying, except for Mrs. Henley and Councilman Taylor. Most of them were on their phone.
Yeah.
A couple were asleep, whatever.
Yeah.
But they never acknowledged that the public engagement was something that should be looked into. Okay, let's not approve it tonight. Let's defer it. Let's do something. Let's answer your questions. They had the look and the attitude and the demeanor. This is going to happen, and this is just the beginning. So yeah, it is coming to a neighborhood near you. There's no doubt about it.
Well, the mayor has said on many occasions, you may recall the project on Lookout Road, when Mayor Dyer says, well, high density is just going to happen. And it would have happened at another place on Shore Drive, except they didn't have 9 votes. Yeah. They might now. but I think this is the message, and Ms. Henley, you are way too nice. But really, this is, there's been many things leading up to this, but this is telling a message that we will patronize you, but we are not listening to you, and we know best, and you might like the quality of life you have in Virginia Beach, but we plan on making it just one more Northern Virginia community. So you the voters that are out there listening, and your friends, get them to watch that meeting. I says, there's nothing, if that doesn't stir you or concern you or scare you as to just how disconnected or uncaring 9 members of council really are, and seeing, you draw your own conclusion when you look at vpap.org and look at the source of who's funding those, who's the investments in those votes, investing in those candidates, who's sitting there. Now, it's interesting. I couldn't vote on something because I got more than $5,000 in dividend from Dominion Resources, and I couldn't vote. Wish I could have, but you can get $23,000 from a person associated with the application, and you can vote, and that's not a conflict of interest. Now, I think all of us know what we dislike is just, and maybe they are uninfluenced by that. That's possible. But the appearance, I couldn't vote on Atlantic Park because I could have gotten a $50,000 donation from the people of Atlantic Park, and I could have voted on it. This is what makes people, they trust Barbara. I understand that. But this basically tells you can't trust them to do what's right. You can just trust them to do what makes money. Maybe for the city, because there's a lot more revenue that could come from that. But this whole when people start saying national defense is like hiding behind the flag, or saying it's the children, it's the children. Well, it has nothing to do with the children, and this has nothing to do with personnel readiness. It's not. This has to do with how can I maximize my profit, giving changing cost of capital on a piece of property that maybe I may or not paid too much. So now to make it work, I'm asking the council, because this makes the numbers work. That shouldn't be council's concern, what makes the numbers work. It should be what's right for the community. But more importantly, give us time. If you think this is so great, why is more time? Why didn't you tell the district council member? If you think if that was something in District 5, the mayor would have told Rosemary Wilson, I'm expediting a project in your place. Certainly would have. Mm-hmm. But the fact that he didn't even give the courtesy of doing that, the staff didn't do it, all those are signs that tells you all doesn't smell well when you lift up the lid. So this is something wrong, but it's done. So the real question is, it's a sunk cost. And now we have to look about, counting on Barbara and Chris Taylor, as to how do we mitigate the danger going forward, and how do we get greater visibility. on what's going on down there. What's the next surprise? So, Barbara, any thoughts about what citizens can do? Oh, go ahead, Elaine. You said you had something?
I have a question for you, Mrs. Henley, and you may not be able to answer. It may just be rhetorical and something we all need to look out for. But do you feel or know or can answer in any way that this was needed in order to advance Project Wayne?
Well, I don't,
Where we can say, oh, look, we have affordable housing this close.
well,
And I understand
I
if you
don't,
can't answer it.
I
but I'm
don't
just
know
wondering.
that there's a direct connection among the people involved in both of them. But if I were this business that is Project Wayne, I would say, well, maybe I've been holding off because I thought it would be too controversial and I wouldn't get it. But hey, look at what they just did right in that area. So I guess they're amenable to it. Maybe I will go forward with it.
Would that be by the mayor expedited it in order to
Well,
make Project Wayne happen? I
Well,
guess?
see, for Project Wayne to happen, the city has got to sell them the property because this is one of the properties that the city purchased with the ITA program. So that means it will have to come as an application for a rezoning, which the city will have to be a participant with because the city is an owner. So, but with this project in the area already, and it didn't seem to bother anybody to say yes of those who voted, then maybe they are in agreement to approving Project Wayne because it's going to bring more tax money to the city and it's going to bring jobs to the city. So I don't know, but I think it's got a much easier path than it would have had.
I would just add to that. I remember Barry Knight when he spoke about the budget way back at a Tidewater Liberty breakfast. He was asked about Project Wayne, and he said, I remember him saying, "Well, I don't know that given that the salary is only $55,000, that was his statement, and given that there isn't a lot of secondary fallout from the type of work that they do, that might not be a good project even on an economic basis." That was the statement that Barry Knight made. Yep. So I took 55,000 and multiplied it times 0.30, 30%. That's where you're financially stressed on rent, meaning you're really stressed, not like 26, and divided that by 12, and that means you could pay $1,375 a month, which means you could only afford those workplace housing projects.
The one bedroom.
The one bedroom. The one bedroom. And the median salary of a single private sector worker in Virginia Beach is $40,000. So you wouldn't be able to, on that, and the people below the median wouldn't be able to afford that one bedroom apartment because you wouldn't be making enough to get in there. So in that sense, but I do think your point is much more to the point than the people working there or living there, but the precedent that you're setting, and that someone, I've always said the fear was Project Wayne would be the precedent setter, and then how could you defend other excursions? Now here we didn't extend any water and sewer into the Green Line area, but it's very close. But we didn't. Project Wayne possibly involved extending primary city services, and that is a whole nother precedent because we have a direct policy of not one side of the Pungo Light is water. You can have, there's none there, but you could have water and sewer. The other side where the gas station is can't. And that was the issue to protect that area. So I do think your assessment is probably much more insightful.
Well, I think the original Green Line, way back when, was an urban services boundary.
Correct.
And that our policy was that we were not going to be extending urban services below that line. Of course, with development as it has come, as the transition area, because we then later designated that area from the Green Line to Indian River Road as the transition area, recognizing that there would be development that would gradually transition from suburban to rural, but any of those services would have to be extended by the developer, not the city.
Correct.
So I think the city, we've done a pretty good job of holding to those policies.
And that's precluded
for 40
sprawl
years.
there. And that's precluded because that cost of that water and sewer
Yeah.
totally borne by the developers, not cheap, especially today.
Right. And of course, Princess Anne Road being the Green Line there and the area of that, in that area. Of course, it's not far from the municipal center, which does have water and sewer, so it's not going to be any great impediment to get water and sewer to this property.
Right, what I meant was none's coming across into that ACU's part of it. They're not putting water and sewer where that parking lot is. It's on the other side
Well,
of the
the
line.
parking lot, though, will be the drainage area, because the proposed drainage is going to be underground. And so I'm sure it can't be under the apartments, so I
No.
guess it'll be under the parking lot. And I guess there are chambers that are built under there, and they maintain the water, and then it will flow to this next door property and across the city's golf course and so forth. all
Well,
the
under
way-
our stormwater management system that, we built the new standards, this Old Donation Gifted School has that underground bladder system. But since it's but now if they're considering this all one parcel, it's 16 and 6 is still under 25. So they're having to meet the 10-year storm standard, has to be held on site, right? That has to be
Right.
stored on site. And the rainfalls over and above that are allowed to proceed and move off the site and go into the storm system. That's how we were building a 100-year storm interstate system, right? That's going to carry based upon these properties all meeting their 10-year storm and 50-year storm. So they're going to have to comply with that. But that bladder is not an inexpensive proposition. Another thing probably driving the density is trying to recapture that capitalization cost. But once again, that's not the primary consideration that the council should be, is to enable him he purchased property or they purchase property. That's their gamble. I purchase stock. No one says, oops, that's not doing well. Let me give you more stock to offset your stock losses. No one does that. So they're no different than me. It's a private sector. You buy property, you take a risk. You didn't do your homework. So sad, so bad. But I'm a tougher capitalist than most.
Well, in addition to all of those folks who came out last night, they've been sending emails, since this has come up over the last week or 10 days, and they've been very good. I mean, I can tell sometimes you'll see one that, okay, it's taken some points from a baseline, but then people would write their own things. They have been the most cogent of the emails for any kind of property. It's been very good. But I know one of the emails I got was from an engineer who said, well, they're going to be putting this underground system here, and when it fails, when it has problems, then they're going to have to dig up this parking lot to fix it. So you've got a problem, but you've got to look at the maintenance of this system as well. And there's no open space to be putting this in. It's got to go in the parking lot. It's the only place
It's
that I
interesting
see.
you mentioned that if you build in the rural areas and you have a septic system, what do they require you to have, Barbara? I know you know this answer. You have to have a blank field. What's that called?
The septic field.
You got to have a reserve
A
field.
reserve field for
Right.
another
So-
one, just in case the first one goes bad. You don't have a reserve field here. If it goes bad, well, I don't know what it would involve, but things do go bad underground there. And I don't know, it's just that when you start looking at this application, and the fact that, like I say, maybe the first design that went through maybe had some good engineering behind it, but when they just quickly changed it, and I know just didn't have time to look at those things, that there've got to be some issues that are going to be difficult to meet.
Oh, I hope that I'm sure this is just you're a well-schooled and well-experienced council member, but I really hope that some of these district council members, it's almost like when either party in the Senate, none of them want to get rid of the filibuster because one day they might be the minority and need it. Well, I think the 9 district people, this system cannot work like the people want to get the benefit they expected from it if the council keeps adopting practices that impedes the ability of district council people to be timely informed, to have a say first. The president doesn't even nominate people from a state without talking to the 2 state senators from that state to make sure that they're all cut in. But I just see everything happens via power play. might makes right, and all sense of this, what we'd hoped to get from the district system, we're not getting. Any of the citizens are not experiencing those benefits. They're getting what you might say might be some of the cons of the system, and there are cons, but that we seem to be getting lots of cons in all terms of the word, and very little of the pros.
Well, and that's what I was getting in those emails I got today was, wait a minute, District 2 spoke very loudly with its citizens and its representative, but nobody bothered to listen. And, usually the speaker could stand up there and say, if you don't vote this way, I'm not going to vote for you next time. Well, so what? You don't get to vote for them anyway. And, if we're going to have that mentality that I don't have to worry about these people because they're not going to vote for me anyway, that's not.
Well, see, I think they've misjudged this. What I liked in this particular thing is that citizens from all across the city came and spoke. And so I think what they've done is, it appears, I never can read their minds, but I can look at the results. A lot of people are campaigning on their results. So the results is that, I'm immune. Okay. And I'm part of the in crowd, so the in crowd will protect me because I'm going along with this stuff, so I can. But I think they're misjudging the public, and I think the public all across the board sees the city really is losing its character and its brand, and once you get behind the eight ball on that, it's like delayed maintenance. You can delay maintenance so much you can never catch up. And Disney World is learning the lesson of taking your customers for granted. Well, they're taking their employers for granted, and they just think they can keep running. Next year they get all this money, run these commercials, all these little direct mail, and people will just bite on all this pablum, nothing, and they won't remember. But listeners, this is, there's the Alamo, there's a lot of things, there's Pearl Harbor, not the comparison, but this is a major attack on the objective good governance of our city. This is what we have, a council that is not looking out for the best interest in the long run of our community. They're going for the short win, not the long-term value of our community. And only you, the voter, can make that change. Well, any last-minute comments, Barbara? I've enjoyed this evening greatly. One of our best shows ever.
Well, this has just troubled me so much, and you've hit on it exactly. And I've said to so many people, it's not just this application, which has got a lot of problems, but it's all of these other things that are going to come that now are in our lap because it's not reversible. As we know, you don't reverse, you don't downzone, right, John?
Correct.
We tried that.
We
But
bought some time, though.
we did. But anyway, and it worked out better.
Matter of
But
fact,
anyway,
Luke Hill came to me and Dave Hill both said they made more money than they ever would have made had they got what they wanted.
really. Well, we can talk about that and laugh maybe with Nancy Parker sometime.
There you go.
But anyway, this troubles me so much because it is such a precedent setter and it's changed so many of our policies that I don't think people who voted for it even realized the policies that were being changed, even though it was pointed out to them. But this one scares me. It really scares me. And not only for my district, but for the whole city.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very informative show. This will be, obviously, it will be retrievable on our Facebook, the VB LiberTEA podcast page, but also on our YouTube where we store things as well. Do encourage and share this with your friends. They might not have been able to listen tonight, but Mrs. Henley has given, like she always does, an in-depth, informative, well thought out look. We used to have a lot of voices on the council, starting with Lewis Jones and others who had longevity and had a historical perspective, and now we have just the wild, wild west. But I appreciate you being a source of sage, and I do want to once again compliment Councilmember Taylor as well, because I think he's new, but clearly he didn't, like like that Marine Corps guy says, General I once heard speak, he says, I'm open-minded, but not so open-minded that my brain falls out. So clearly, Chris Taylor is putting his brain to good use, and we appreciate his support of your position. With that, join us next week on Wednesday night, Virginia Beach LiberTEA Facebook Live. Thank you so much.